Kenneth Walker is an American journalist with over 50 years of experience. He worked for ABC News as a White House and Justice Department correspondent, as well as working as a foreign correspondent. He has won numerous awards in print, radio, and television. He won an Emmy for outstanding analysis of a current news story for his report as a correspondent for ABC Nightline News' historic broadcast originating in South Africa. In today's interview, he will share with us his path to journalism, and he will also discuss some of the issues facing our country today. Welcome to American Experience Black Edition. I am happy to have Mr. Kenneth Walker, an American journalist, award-winning journalist, on our show today. Welcome, Mr. Walker.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and have, except for the 20 years I spent living in South Africa, have lived here the rest of my life.
Okay. And where did you go to school?
In high school, I went to Archbishop Carroll, which is a Catholic school here in Washington, and a school on the hill overlooks the U.S. Capitol. And Catholic University, I went to college.
Okay. So how did you decide on becoming a journalist?
It kind of found me. I mean, near the end of the 12th grade, I didn't have any financial prospects for college. So I'm wondering what I was going to do. So, I found my way from one college to another, asking questions. And in that way, I found a program at Catholic University. At the time, it was called Partnership. Partnership program was one of many found at universities around the United States in the year after the assassination of Dr. King. The primary purpose of which was to take primarily inner city Black youth and provide an opportunity, scholarship, money, book money, for them to attend university. And Partnership was the one they started at Catholic University. So I found my way there. Now, they had, in that initial class, they were going to admit, I think, 20 people, and I was late finding out about them. So I didn't make the cut. But one of the guys who was running the program, who's today still a dear friend, said, well, I see you've won some awards for writing and seem to be good at it. Why don't you go down to the daily newspaper, one of two at the time, Washington Star, and ask them for a scholarship? Well, I was too young to know how ridiculous that was. So I went. And I got down there, and the editor had a 90-minute, 2-hour talk. He gave me a tour of the newspaper, and I left, and we found out the next day that they were offering me a 4-year scholarship and an entry-level job. So that formed my introduction to journalism, starting that August. The entry-level job was what they called at the time a copy boy. That's a newspaper term I probably think they don't use anymore, but that's what it was called then. And that was basically kids who were gophers. Copy, send this over there, or take this upstairs, or take this down to the press room, or whatever it was. So I did that, and the path from copy boy, there's copy boy, and then what they call dictationist, which are the people who sit at a bank and reporters call in their stories and they type in the stories, or type it at the time on a typewriter and then send the paper or a copy to the desk. So I went from copy boy to that. And all the while at the same time, I'm dabbling in journalism. I would cover high school sports, then after that, I would write some obituaries. And then night police, because I was going to school mostly in the daytime. I was working at night, so covering night police meant sitting in the newsroom and so often calling around to local police stations or departments and see if anything was going on, or if something came to your attention, you would call them and ask about it, or if it was really interesting, you'd get your butt there, whatever was going on. So I did that for about 2 years. And then after my third year, which was also my third year at university, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. They said, we want you to be a full-time staff reporter. Now, I thought about it, and it would have been nice to do another year and graduate with that degree. But I wasn't sure that offer was going to be good a year from then. So I said, hey, I'm going to jump on this. So I jumped on it. And that's how we come to be having this discussion.
Wow. So no turning back after that, huh?
No turning back after that. I loved it. I mean, it was... you're an eyewitness to history, and you get to write the first draft of history. So it can be exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, fair amount of the judge work as well, but it can be exciting.
And also in a city like Washington, D.C., there's a lot to cover. So
exactly,
that was an opportunity you couldn't refuse.
Exactly. Now, go ahead.
So how long did you work for the Washington Star?
Until they closed in 1981.
Okay.
They were shut down in 1981, and my initial instinct was to take some time off. I'd been working and going to school full time, all that time. Married, have a family, and trying to get a break. But a lot of news organizations came to the Star to evaluate the available talent. Newspapers, TV, radio, and being a polite person, I met with people who called, answered all their questions. And in that process, ABC News, actually, the only network, TV network, show up. All the others were print organizations, newspapers, magazines. And so I went to the ABC News Bureau in downtown Washington, and we had a conversation. And then the guy who was the Washington bureau chief at the time gave me a little tour, and we wound up at one of the studios and put me behind an anchor desk. He said, tell us about yourself. So I proceeded to do that. And so while I'm talking, I notice in my peripheral vision, there are people coming into the studio watching. And it's actually filling up. And so at some point, I say to myself, I think you probably ought to take this seriously. Because, these people seem to be taking it seriously. But at some point in this presentation, I found all that funny, so I just broke out laughing. I went home convinced I'd blown it. The next morning, they called and offered me a job. And so that's how I got to television.
So what was your first television job? Were you, what was the title? The anchor of the...
General assignment reporter.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Whatever comes up.
Okay.
Which could be anything. Any kind of breaking news. And then, of course, you could pursue whatever stories you found interesting and that you could sell to the producers. So I did that, but pretty soon I started getting beats, areas where you specialize in coverage. One was the Justice Department. One was the law. One was the White House, which in network television is a prenatal assignment. Those are the people who get the most time on the air. But the last year of the Star, I went and spent a few months in South Africa and came back, and that was the last series the paper ever ran. It was a series of news reports that I wrote from South Africa. I mention that because while I was a Justice Department correspondent at ABC, I suggested to them that they needed to do something out of South Africa. And so I got their attention, and I showed them my series, which actually several of them had already read. And so they said, okay, great. So Nightline, then at its prime, at its peak, anchored by Ted Koppel, decided, hell, we're going to do this. We're going to go to South Africa. We're going to go, we're going to spend 10 days, and we're going to broadcast from there, and you're our correspondent. So,
wow.
So we went, I went, and was off to the races. I think that probably was the highlight of my career at ABC, that series that we did in South Africa.
Tell me a little bit more about what you wrote for South Africa for the Star and your experience working as the correspondent there. How was your time in South Africa?
Well, let me tell you how I first got the idea. The Star was a 5-story office building facing the Southeast Freeway in Washington. Freeway ran right by. And so my desk in the newsroom kind of occupied the whole 3rd floor. And my desk was kind of open plan thing. Everybody had a bunch of desks around. My desk was in the back, closest to the window. There were 4 or 5 of them. So I'm sitting at my desk one day reading one of the few occasions where South Africa had appeared on the front page of the newspaper. This was about the uprisings in South Africa. So this white editor walked behind me and saw what I was reading. He said, "Oh, I see we're finally getting rid of some of you people." Now, I mentioned that I was in the back by this window overlooking the Southeast Freeway because I was seriously tempted to throw his ass right, to throw him through it. Okay. I want that window onto the Southeast Freeway. But I restrained myself and just said, "You clearly don't know how to speak with me. So except for that which is absolutely essential to the production of this newspaper, you shall never, ever speak to me again." And he did.
Good.
But that, the very idea of it sparked in me, I said, I got to go there. I mean, because I had been gathering this attitude, these understandings from reading and the occasional TV piece about South Africa, and all of it seemed so familiar. And this was not foreign stuff to me that I'm looking at, reading about, hearing about. And so I just had this overwhelming desire to go and experience it firsthand. And it was almost identical. I mean, first of all, there are a number of languages, 11 African languages, and 2 and English, and then Afrikaans, which is the other European language. But English is the language of business, and so in the cities most people speak it. And so it was easy to get around, and and meet people and converse with people. I recall shortly after I got there, I went to the funeral of this young black man who had been killed while he was on a ticket line. With other workers there and picketing for higher wages and whatnot. And got shot that day. And so, probably a little before your time, but funerals, black funerals back then, these were like major events. Cast of thousands, and everybody's toy-toying, and, shouting freedom songs and whatnot. So it was something to see. But, after that, like it is in a lot of back homes in the U.S., after the funeral, people make their way back to the home of the family, which I did. And so I'm there, and a guy comes up to me, black guy. I later learned his name is Sam Mabe, and Sam was a journalist for one of the black newspapers. And he said, "Excuse me, brother, who are you? Where are you from? It's clear you are not from here because you walk like you are free." And I knew immediately what he meant. Because back then, a lot of black South Africans are trying to get from one place to another without attracting no trouble.
Okay.
It's kind of like slow and down, eyes down, kind of bent over a little bit from side to side. And I certainly didn't walk like that. And Sam saw that in me and knew I was from someplace else. And we became great friends until he died. But that was my introduction to how I should carry myself in South Africa if I wanted to go incognito, which was difficult to do. But one of the other things I soon realized, one of the other similarities, is that white South Africans spend a lot of time telling me, "You're not like our blacks." Which I found interesting because I found black South Africans among the most similar of Africans to African Americans.
So when they said that, what were they saying? What do you think they meant when they said that? That you're not like...
Well, it's the same thing white people in America mean when they tell blacks from other places that y'all are different.
Okay.
You're not like our blacks. It's a way of sowing division and trying to stem any sense of solidarity you might have with our blacks.
Okay.
And so it's universal. I mean, white supremacy looks the same everywhere. And so, I say that, I mean, as an aside, I was interested to learn recently by reading Isabel Wilkerson's book called Caste, that toward the beginning of the 20th century, there was this academic study in a lot of places trying to build up an infrastructure to support white supremacy. There were studies going on in Europe, in America, and South Africa, obviously, and particularly in Germany, beginning after World War I, that led to Nazism. Now, the people who invented Nazism went around and looked at all of the available examples of apartheid in South Africa, white supremacy in the United States, and they decided the U.S. experience was too extreme.
The Nazis?
White racism and white supremacy in the U.S. was too much for the Nazis, which I found astonishing.
Yeah, I do too.
But understood perfectly because it's absolutely true. We are the world's premier white supremacists in the United States of America. Second to no one. So anyway, I moved around South Africa as far as I could, trying as privately and incognito as I could, meeting as many people as I could. And so it became, I developed this attitude that at one point while I was there, at some point I have to come back here and live. Because it was clear to me these people were going to be free. They were going to be free a lot sooner than we were. And so I wanted to, I could imagine that, and the idea of it, I found fascinating. I said, I want to be able to live in a black-owned country like that, which led to my going back first to ABC and later as the African Bureau Chief for National Public Radio to live. And that's when I spent 20 years there.
Wow, 20 years. So that's interesting. You saw, you were there when they were not free, and then you went back. Could you really tell the difference?
Oh, yes. I mean, when I went back for ABC News, I could tell the difference when I got off the plane. As I said, during the first trip, many blacks you saw were trying to get from one place to another without attracting no trouble. And so, I mean, in the airport, from the airplane on the steps, I could see most black people were walking shoulders back, head up, eyes out. Something had changed.
Something changed.
And so they were a lot closer to freedom. They were much more insistent about it and not giving a flying hoot about how they appeared to white people coming up the street. So that was the biggest change, yes.
Wow. So how much time did you spend at ABC News?
I was at ABC from 1981 until 86.
86.
Yes. Then they were starting a new program, national syndicated program called USA Today, a television show.
Okay.
And the guy who was the executive producer at the time asked to meet with me, and I did. And he offered me the position of anchor of the money section. So I left ABC to do that. Now, unfortunately, they mucked up an idea that really shouldn't have failed, but it did fail. So I was only there for it was 2 years that the broadcast lasted. And so I just kind of roamed after that. But, before too long, I got picked up by National Public Radio to be their African News.
So you are an Emmy Award-winning journalist. Tell us about that. That's not lightweight. So,
well, among the awards I got, mostly at that time for my South African reporting for Nightline, it's one of the lightest of weights. They had to invent the awards for that broadcast. The Columbia Baton Awards, they all used to be silver. They invented gold for that. Peabody Awards created some new category for that new broadcast, which was groundbreaking at the time. And so at the time, Emmy was certainly a nice statue to have. It's still sitting on one of my shelves. But was, in terms of the profession, maybe the least of the awards we got back then.
So just kind of shifting a little bit, can you tell me a little bit about your experience with the release of the Human Shield in Iraq?
Yes. Prior to joining National Public Radio, I was producer of, was also a nationally syndicated show by Jesse Jackson. And so when Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, and at the same time, basically barring American citizens from leaving the country, and by becoming so-called human shields. We weren't even on the air yet. We were planning the first broadcast. Reverend Jackson, Jesse, as we call him, decides, I had to go over there and free these people. So, of course you do. So, so we prepared to go, and everybody was, the people who were, I think Warner Brothers was this national syndicator of the show, and Quincy Jones was the chief executive producer, and everybody was telling Reverend Jackson he couldn't do it. You can't do this. And so the other producer of the show was a white guy, and he was opposed to it. And so he was. So anyway, and through all of that, the decision was made. We are going. Whatever happens to the show, we go. And so one of the last conversations I'm having with the white producer, he's really concerned that we'll just become additional human shields, and that was one of the reasons he didn't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't think he wanted to become a human shield. So, in one of my last discussions with him about that, I said, "No, I don't think so. I think he'll be getting too much of a positive spin out of Jesse's visit, deciding to take him hostage. That would just piss off too many people. And they wouldn't take me hostage. I said, I can do something in that situation, Michael. I said to this white producer, that you can't. And he said, what is that? I said, I can send him greetings from the oppressed peoples of the United States. And so the producer got it immediately and understood that was an advantage that I would have had, and I would have hesitated to do so. Mm-hmm. And if that was an advantage I would have in that situation, I would certainly used it if I had to. So that was how the hostage situation came about, and of course. Reverend Jackson arranged it so that the first plane load of hostages to come out, he's on that plane. We were on that plane.
Wow.
We come out and lands initially in Germany, Air Force Base there. And the international presence was just tremendous. And the perfect lead-in to the start of his show. So
that's a good way to start a new show, huh?
That's a great way to start a new show. Being the object of that kind of international focus. So that was how the hostage story started.
So at the time, did the American government feel that he could actually pull it off? Can he talk about it?
No. In fact, Jesse done that a few times. Mm-hmm. Different situations, and their attitude was he was method. Now, although I think some of American officials came to appreciate the last couple of those kind of episodes that just could be useful. You might actually get the hostages out, or whatever it was, and at a minimum, you can buy them some time to do whatever it is they think about doing. But they were never in a position to say, oh, boy, we think this is a great idea. Nobody did. Nobody did.
Interesting. So fast forwarding to journalism today.
Yes.
I know you probably have quite a bit of an opinion, being as though your career has spanned so long. You've seen so many different, events. Let's start with this one, the insurrection. As far as the coverage of that, how do you think that played out?
They were slow getting in gear, just like the cops and the government were slow in getting in gear. These were white people after all, And so the idea that they could mount an insurrection against against the Capitol are just preposterous. Unthinkable. But the press got the point sooner than most. And so, just by virtue of having to run and rerun the footage, the story told itself, and you couldn't pretend it was something else. You had to acknowledge it was what it was and then talk about that. So in that sense, I thought the coverage of the insurrection, all in all, served its purpose. After the aftermath, as usual, then we were slow in dealing with some of the issues, like what happened in particular to the Black Capitol policemen and the Black and non-Black members of Congress. And so I was reminded of that just yesterday. There are some members of Congress who are talking about how to climb down from the security level that the Capitol was under, including the presence of 2,000 National Guards people around the building. I'm convinced that Black members of Congress are not so anxious to see these people go. That they almost certainly want some of them to remain. And that whether they remain or not, or for however long they remain, that some serious strengthening has to occur in U.S. Capitol security in order for them to feel comfortable about it. This guy, this senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, just quoted yesterday as saying, he wasn't at no point was he afraid during this insurrection. He said, now, if they had been Black Lives Matter people, probably would have been afraid. And these people are shameless. I mean, they are what they are, and they don't care to oppose it. So, I mean, there was that initial attempt to even deny they were Trump supporters. This was Antifa and Black Lives Matter. These were Trump people. But it was too much footage going for too long and too many sound bites from these people to be able to pretend there's anything but Trump supporters mounting an insurrection at a time when a transfer of power is supposed to be taking place to disrupt the counting of votes to ensure that transfer of power. There's no way to pretend that's anything but. I think that point has been made. But none too soon, because we are in perilous times. Mm-hmm. The country, as a so-called democracy, is in perilous times. African Americans are in perilous times. Asian Americans are in perilous times. There are people, white supremacist terrorists, who are out there vocal and willing and determined to kill us. And everybody needs to be clear about it. And there's no point in coloring it up or pretending it's something else. That's what we have. And that's on one level what's going on. But you also have 250 pieces of legislation in 40 states trying to further suppress and restrict the African American right to vote. Excuse me? It's 2021. And so they do this in public, on stage, on TV, and defend it. So I'm convinced we're in perilous times. And not all of us will survive it.
That's interesting. You had said something earlier about in South Africa. You said they were determined to be free. They were determined to make sure that happened. Yes. And here we are in this country. Do you think we as African Americans have that same drive, or have we have too many of us become
Yeah, I do think we have that same determination.
okay?
I'm terribly happy and satisfied with this new young generation. They're not going back. We're not going back. And we will continue to insist that this remain or become a nation where everyone is equal under the law. That's a nation a lot of white people don't want to live in. It really is a nation a lot of white people don't want to live in. And that's evidenced by this renewed emphasis on voter suppression and restriction. About the fact that 75 million people voted for an avowed racist. But the choice is going to become very simple. One, this country cannot go into the future dominated by white supremacists. For one, the international infrastructure for that has collapsed. We no longer can throw our way around whenever we want, wherever we want. There are now non-white peoples who are important parts of international institutions, whether it's the World Bank, aspects of world trade, the Chinese economy being as large as projected to get larger in the American economy. And the fact that non-white, formerly colonized, formerly conquered people are still determined to earn their own freedom, earn their own way. And so the international infrastructure for white supremacy is not nearly what it was when it was pervasive. You talk about the period just after World War II, it was pervasive. It no longer is, and it's diminishing every day. And so, in America, what are we talking about? Yeah, they can, and they're willing, and seem willing, to kill a lot of people, to kill a lot of us, in order to maintain this supremacy. They can't kill us all. And they can't kill enough of us and remain respected citizens of the world. Countries, businesses, U.S. businesses. U.S. businesses, that's where white supremacy is breaking down on a number of fronts, at least in terms of their public costume. Because they got non-white customers, most of their customers. Used to be the white people had all the money. That's no longer true. Most of their customers are non-white people, and black people are a substantial chunk of that. And so that's why they have to, as they did, stop donating money to the Republican National Committee in the immediate aftermath of the insurrection. That's why they will be pressured to not donating money to white supremacists who are running for office and touting things like this kind of voter suppression that they're doing, and trying to propagate the lie that Trump had the election stolen from him. Businesses are leading the charge on that. I mean, they're not. I mean, they're messing with their money. They can't help it. So I think that at the end of the day, I'm an optimist. I have grandchildren. And I have to be. They will inherit a world better than the one I inherited. They'll leave one better still. But I mean, I'm not naive. Nothing lasts forever. People like to think some of them that is this shiny object on a hill called the United States of America will exist forever. That's not true. It is not destined to live, to survive forever. And the quickest way that it will not survive is with in the dying throes of white supremacy, the determination to wreck it, but they can't have it on their own terms.
So do you see the election with Kamala Harris becoming the first African-American vice president as, like you said, you're optimistic? Do you see that as being something to...
I see that as maybe one of the lesser sides. I mean, Barack Obama got elected president after all. And so in the continuum, it is another indication that a white supremacist dominated country is not sustainable going forward. That just can't happen. And I've asked people who will understand that are the diehard white supremacists. But there are a lot of them out there. Now, I mean, I'm of the view that a majority of white Americans are white supremacists. Now, most of them are not running around bombing black churches or storming the Capitol. But they believe in their hearts that white people are better than God intended. Now, I think there's some hope, in the experiences of their children and their grandchildren, who I think are leading a much more diverse lifestyles, much more. They're encountering
the culture. The American culture has included all cultures.
Yes, and internationally as well. So, I mean, I think that this next generation of white kids will diminish. I'm not going to say that here comes the cavalry, but they will diminish the intensity of white supremacy in society, I think.
When it comes to the media, do you think the media predicts how society behaves, or is it the other way around?
No, I don't think the media predicts how society behaves. I think a lot of its coverage, and first of all, I mean, the media is...
Like for instance, I say that because when you think of like the major news outlet like Fox News, when you watch Fox News, they're not showing certain things. And then those people who watch Fox News will never watch CNN or MSNBC. So it kind of creates different segments of people and what they believe.
Yes. Now, I think that's going to continue to be a big part of the problem. But part of the problem was created when the federal government abolished the fairness doctrine, which nobody's heard about today for good reason. But until they abolished it, I think in the Reagan administration, it required that broadcasters had a duty under the law to provide opposing views on various subjects. It's a fairness doctrine. Mm-hmm. But when the right wingers and Reagan knew what they were doing when they abolished the fairness doctrine. It preceded and paved the way for the creation of something like Fox News. Now, but even Fox News is, and anybody else in the marketplace, subject to the whims of the marketplace. So when, which is why they had to fire some people after the insurrection, because their advertisers, they weren't going for that stuff. And so they're going to increasingly face those kinds of dilemmas. that stuff they're putting out on Fox News is contrary to the views of their customers. And so, in that sense, there is some hope, some that is concerned as a restraint on the unbridled lunacy of places like Fox. Having said that, there'll always be a market for that kind of stuff. Not always, but certainly with the balance of our lifetime, there will be a market. And as such, somebody will cater to.
Then I guess now it's easier because anybody can start a podcast, anybody can start a YouTube channel.
That's another issue, but that's a double-edged sword. And this whole technology, what we're doing, on the internet, what social media, gives everybody, including African Americans, tremendous opportunity. And learning from one another, cooperating with one another, and organizing around issues we care about. It's true of everybody, including white supremacists. But it's a double-edged sword. I think we're increasingly making the most of it.
And the pandemic actually showed us that we can do it even better, because before the pandemic, I've been on 1,000 Zoom calls in the last year, and it's much easier to do than people thought. So you can pretty much have the world at your fingertips.
Exactly.
In minutes.
It's not going back. People talking about going back to normal. Normal is gone in so many ways, and that's certainly one of the main ways. I can't imagine. The value of urban commercial real estate is gone. Who's going to be building, skyscraper office buildings for people to sit in and work anymore?
You can work from home.
Work from home.
Yeah.
Not too many. It's going to be a while before we figure out what the new normal is, but certain things are clear, and that is that getting around, being in touch, spreading ideas, organizing, it's taken on new characteristics, and I think I'm optimistic that especially our young people figure that game out, and they are on it.
Well, you said you started your career in the late 60s. After the assassination of Martin Luther King. And as I hear you talk now, you're talking really positively about young African Americans. How are your thoughts in comparison to the civil rights movement and Black Lives Matter?
It's continual. It's, there was that lull, if you can call it that, when both the beginning of mass incarceration and the threatening of black communities was some of the most powerful drugs on the planet. It was crack or heroin. And there was that lull where a generation was either put in jail or put to sleep. And that's still one of their favorite tools, two of their favorite tools. But this new generation, I think certainly for the last 10 years, have been coming out of that sleep. Enough of this avoiding prison. And they have the fearlessness of young people. I think they'll live forever, so they can march and trap on cops and troops. But the civil rights movement was an important episode. I'm a civil rights baby. People born in the 50s, early 60s, raised in that period of time. Civil rights, black people, civil rights people. And so today's young people didn't spring fully grown, out of Minerva's head or something. I mean, they took a while for them to get born, get nourished, get nurtured, developed, see. But I was always confident that they would get there. Because why? Because the white supremacists would make sure these kids would not be able to avoid that. And so they would have to confront it. And they would figure out their own strategies and methods of opposing it, of resisting it. And they've done that, and doing it in increasingly creative ways. So I'm, it's a different generation, but, the same kind of courage it took back then is the same kind of courage we need now. I mean, I'm writing my memoir, and one of the earlier parts, I'm looking at, in the 50s especially, television sets started appearing in homes, including African-American homes, and so I'm looking at this stuff. And I'm looking at kids my age and their parents being attacked by white troopers with fire hoses and nightsticks. I'm looking at 6-year-old Ruby Bridges walking through a gauntlet of adult white people shouting the vilest of things at her as she tried to walk into the segregated school. I'm watching then the bus boycotts, the other aspects of activism. I'm watching, and the resistance of it, to it by the government, including the assassinations of people involved, including white people. Viola Luizzo was, driving people into voting rights rallies down there in the South. And they killed her. Including Shorty Goodman, Whitewood, they killed him. They killed the Kennedys, two presidents most closely identified with the civil rights movement. And so, of course, they then killed Malcolm X and a whole passel of other black leaders, including Black Panthers like Fred Hampton. And so then they go to the men who I see on television again. The body of Martin Luther King Jr. lying on the balcony of the Rainbow Hotel. His brains blown. So by the time I'm getting out of high school, I am convinced, without any doubt, white people are trying to kill me. It's just as simple and plain as that. And so, and that feeling hasn't diminished over the years. But apropos of your question, in terms of the civil rights movement, it's a continuum. And this is a natural evolution, a natural maturation of what's going on in the civil rights movement. And it will evolve and mature from here to what I cannot say.
Wow, this has been a very interesting topic, interesting story. You have a wealth of knowledge. I can talk to you all day.
Well, do this again at some point.
Huh?
You can do this again at some point.
Of course. Before we go, I just wanted to kind of just ask. I know you've been in South Africa for 20 years. You said you were a White House correspondent, I believe, in the U.S. Justice Department. And I'm pretty sure you've come across a lot of very VIP, important people, world leaders. Which one of them have impacted you the most and why?
No, they're all so special in so many
in different ways, right? Well, just give an example of one.
Well, of all the so-called celebrity figures, I mean, it's Maya Angelou, it was I met briefly Toni Morrison. That was, and there are various actors and performers like that. But in terms of most of us, most Black people, have been on this same path, and they're on this continuum. And in that sense, we have developed leaders who are on that continuum. And leaders for the moment. And we've also, had our share of idiots. I mean, this fool, Senator Scott from South Carolina, what is it, yesterday, the day before, says woke supremacy is as bad as white supremacy. Who is this idiot?
I don't know.
I mean, where is his mama? I mean, so we have our share of idiots, but we have our share of people who are rising and have risen to the moment. I think that's we have a lot of them. It's hard for me to separate them out. It's very hard for me to separate them. I am proud, and many of them begin in my family. I mean, my grandmother. I mean, she's the youngest and the only female with 13 children. She had a tough group. I mean, she had to fight her way out of bed, into bed, to the dinner table, on the dinner table. I mean, period. And so she was one of the strongest people I've ever met. She passed a lot of that over to my mother, who was the second most strongest person I've ever met. And so, I walked hand in hand with my grandmother to a 63 March on Washington. And so I'm sitting watching these televised moments in our history with my mother and grandmother. And so I'm listening to the commentary, running commentary. And they're not trying to incite their children. In fact, if anything, they really want to calm them down. But they didn't sugarcoat what was going on. And so, in that sense, our parents, our grandparents, developed the ideas and the expectations led to the leadership roles many of us have adopted and played and continue. It's a continuum.
Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day. And definitely, whenever your memoirs are done, I would love to have you come back on the show so we can talk about that.